One man against a tank. Sounds crazy, right? Like something out of an action movie where the hero defies all logic. But this story is real. As real as the steel and concrete of a burning city. Today we're going to meet Yakov Pavlov, a name that has become etched in history. It's 1942. The world is at war, and one of the bloodiest battles is about to unfold, Stalingrad. Imagine a city turned into hell. Building by building, street by street, the German and Soviet armies battle with indescribable ferocity. Every window is a threat. In the midst of this chaos, a young sergeant named Yakov Pavlov receives an order. His mission: to scout a 4-story apartment building. It sounds simple, but in Stalingrad, nothing was. This building overlooked a key square and the Volga River. Whoever controlled it had a huge tactical advantage. Pavlov and a handful of men advanced through the rubble. The building was occupied by Germans. There was a swift and brutal fight. In the end, only Pavlov and 3 other soldiers remained standing, but they had taken the building. They instantly realized its strategic importance. They couldn't just sit back and wait. They knew the Germans would return, and in force. So they began turning that building into a fortress. They broke through internal walls to create corridors and firing points. They dug trenches all around. They laid barbed wire and mines. It was a race against time and against death. They acquired a mortar, machine guns, and, crucially, a PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle. This weapon would be their lifeline against the armored vehicles. Every window, every hole in the wall, became a defensive position. They worked day and night, knowing their lives depended on it. The tension was palpable. Soon, Pavlov's small group received reinforcements, numbering about 25 men. They weren't many, but they were determined. They represented diverse nationalities from the Soviet Union, united by a common goal: to resist. The House of Pavlov, as it became known, was ready for battle. And the Germans returned. Wave after wave. Infantry, snipers, artillery barrages. Even the fearsome Stuka bombers tried to reduce them to rubble. But Pavlov's house held firm. From their improvised loopholes, they returned fire with ferocious determination. This is where the legend is made. German tanks, the panzers, were fearsome beasts. Seeing one approaching your position was blood-curdling. But Pavlov and his men had a plan, and that anti-tank rifle. They didn't fire wildly. They waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity. They aimed for the caterpillar tracks to immobilize them. For the engine grills, looking for a fire. For the driver's visor. These were difficult shots, under immense pressure. One mistake and it was the end. But Yakov, often handling the rifle himself, demonstrated incredible calm and accuracy. Their flagship weapon was the PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle. This wasn't a simple carbine. It was a monster, nearly 2 meters long, that fired 14.5mm shells capable of piercing the side or rear armor of the tanks of the era. But it wasn't magic. It was pure skill and courage. You needed nerves of steel and exceptional aim. One shot at the frontal armor of a Panzer IV and you would only enrage it. Pavlov and his men knew they had to wait for the perfect moment. When the tank turned, exposing its vulnerable flank, it was the moment to act. Or when it tried to overcome an obstacle, revealing its vulnerable belly or the thinner top of the turret. Every shot counted. A miss wasn't just a stray bullet. It was a missed opportunity and a greater danger to all the defenders of the besieged building. On one memorable occasion, a tank came too close. Machine gun bullets ricocheted off its armor like hail. Pavlov, from a high position, probably on the 3rd or 4th floor, waited patiently. The noise was deafening. The ground shook beneath his feet. As the tank exposed its more vulnerable upper section while maneuvering through the rubble of the square, Pavlov fired. Direct hit. The anti-tank shell found its mark. The tank came to an abrupt halt, a column of black smoke rising from inside. Another day, another tank disabled by cunning. The Germans didn't give up easily. They tried different tactics. Sending infantry first to clear anti-tank positions, bombarding with heavy artillery before an armored assault. But Pavlov's house seemed impregnable. The defenders used the cellars to protect themselves from the bombardments. They would then quickly rush to their positions as the infantry or tanks advanced. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, but in this case, the mice had very sharp teeth and an iron will. Communication between floors was key, alerting each other to enemy movements. Pavlov proved to be a born leader. He maintained high morale, organized the defense efficiently, and actively participated in the fighting. He knew his men depended on his example. He wasn't just a sergeant. He was the heart of that stubborn resistance amidst the destruction. They even managed to dig a communication trench to the nearby Soviet positions, allowing them to receive limited supplies of ammunition and some food, as well as evacuate the most seriously wounded. This connection, though precarious, was vital to sustaining the fight. Life inside Pavlov's house was a constant hell. The smell of gunpowder, smoke, and death was omnipresent. Food was scarce, as was water. They slept in shifts, if they slept at all. The stress was unimaginable, knowing that each day could be their last. But the camaraderie was strong. A few civilians who had taken refuge in the basement of the building before Pavlov and his men arrived also played their part. Although terrified, they helped as best they could, carrying ammunition from one position to another, caring for the wounded with the meager means available, sharing their misery. It became a strange family united by danger and desperation. The presence of these civilians, while adding a layer of worry, also reminded the soldiers why they were fighting, to protect the innocent caught in the brutality of war. Pavlov's house became a symbol. For the Soviets, it was proof that resistance was possible, that the invader was not invincible. On German maps, this building was marked as a fortress. For the Germans, it was a thorn in their side, a constant frustration, a red dot that never went out. The German commanders couldn't believe that a single building, defended by a handful of men, could hold up their advance for so long and cost them so many resources and lives. They attempted to assault it dozens of times, with different combinations of forces, but were always repelled. General Vasily Chukov, commander of the Soviet 62nd Army defending Stalingrad, later mentioned that the Germans lost more men attempting to take Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. While this may be an exaggeration to boost morale, it underscores the ferocity of the defense. The key to Pavlov's success wasn't just the anti-tank rifle. It was the clever preparation of the building, the use of all available weapons, from grenades to machine guns, and above all, his incredible courage and refusal to give up a single meter of ground without a fight. Each defender knew their role. There were machine gun positions covering the approaches, mortar positions to harass the massing infantry, and, of course, anti-tank riflemen ready to engage the armored vehicles. It was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of resistance. The Germans even attempted to blow up the building from below by digging tunnels. But Pavlov's men were alert. They discovered the mining attempts and counterattacked, sometimes with their own explosive charges or by flooding the enemy tunnels if possible. Underground warfare was added to the surface warfare. Imagine the tension of hearing digging sounds beneath your feet, not knowing when or where an explosion might occur. It was a psychological war as much as a physical one. The lack of sleep, the poor diet, the cold that began to grip as the Russian autumn arrived, it all added up. But the determination of Pavlov and his men did not waver. They knew that their small fortress was a beacon of hope in the immensity of the Battle of Stalingrad. If they fell, it would be a moral victory for the enemy and a blow to their comrades in other parts of the city. For almost 2 months, from late September to November 25, 1942, they held out. 60 days. Under constant siege, with almost daily attacks. 60 days in which death was a constant companion. It's hard to imagine the level of physical and mental endurance required. Finally, the tide of the Battle of Stalingrad began to turn. The Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, which encircled the German Sixth Army. The troops surrounding Pavlov's house were pushed back or destroyed. The siege was over. When the Soviet relief forces finally reached Pavlov's house, they found the defenders exhausted, dirty, but alive and with their spirits intact. They had accomplished their mission and more. They had proven that human will can be stronger than steel and fire. Yakov Pavlov survived the war. He was decorated as a hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military and civilian distinction. His name became legendary. Pavlov's house was one of the first buildings reconstructed in Stalingrad, which was later renamed Volgograd. The tenacity of Pavlov and his platoon inspired other Soviet soldiers. If that small group could withstand such ferocious attacks for so long, then so could others. It became a story told to boost morale in the darkest moments. The Germans, for their part, saw Pavlov's house as a symbol of the stubborn and irrational Russian resistance that was thwarting their plans. Every day the building remained in Soviet hands was a reminder of their inability to break the spirit of the city's defenders. It's important to remember that Pavlov was not alone. Although the house bears his name because he was the initial commander and most visible figure, it was a team effort. Each of the approximately 25 men who defended that building deserves to be remembered for their courage and sacrifice. There were artillerymen, riflemen, and improvised sappers, all working together. The diversity of their backgrounds is also notable, reflecting the multinational nature of the Red Army. All united by the need to survive and the determination not to give in. Pavlov and his men not only destroyed tanks, they also wreaked havoc on the German infantry attempting to assault the building. Their well-placed positions gave them commanding fields of fire over the adjacent square, turning it into a killing zone for the attackers. The use of tunnels and trenches was not only for communication and supply, but also for maneuver. They could move from one part of the building to another, or even to exterior defensive positions, without exposing themselves too much to enemy fire, deceiving the Germans about their true numbers. The defenders even managed to set up a field telephone, connecting them directly to regimental headquarters. This allowed them to coordinate the defense, request artillery support, albeit limited, and report on the situation. A vital lifeline in the midst of isolation. The defense of Pavlov's house lasted from September 27 to November 25, 1942. It was 59 days of non-stop hell. Days and nights of bombing, assaults, hunger, thirst, and the constant presence of death. A time that must have seemed like an eternity. After the war, Yakov Pavlov joined the Communist Party and was elected 3 times as a deputy to the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. He led a relatively quiet life, but he was always remembered for his heroism at Stalingrad. He died in 1981, but his legacy lives on. Pavlov's house remains a place of pilgrimage for those interested in the history of World War II. It is a symbol not only for Russia, but for all who value freedom and resistance against oppression. History shows us that sometimes a single individual or a small group, in the right place at the right time, with the right determination, can change the course of events, or at least inspire future generations. Yakov Pavlov was one such individual. The figure of Yakov Pavlov, with his anti-tank rifle, facing off against the mighty panzers, has become an iconic image of the Battle of Stalingrad. He represents the tenacity, cunning, and courage of the Soviet soldier in the face of the Nazi invasion. An enduring symbol. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe. See you in the next video.